Welcome, brave souls. Tonight's tales descend deeper into darkness with each telling. We're thrilled you've joined us in this realm of horror. For extended nightmares, find us on Patreon. These carefully chosen stories will haunt you long after tonight ends. Sleep won't come easily. 48 words. Story 1. Update 1. Update 2. Hello everybody. Welcome back to my special beep. It's been raining a lot lately. Rain and thunder. And the wind is really howling something terrible. But as of yet, I'm all right. I haven't heard anything from the cops. Who, according to some users, who told me cops no longer use radio channels to communicate. Maybe something else, like an independent organization, like storm chasers or something, but chasing escaped mental patients instead of storms anyway. Me and the dogs are doing fine at this point. Nothing has really transpired since my last update. I know. I really should stop going upstairs. But today, I have to. I'll be real sneaky, okay. But I need to. I only have enough food for today. I guess I could stretch it to tomorrow if I really rationed it. But honestly, I'd prefer to get it over with now. The lights just flickered. I mean, sure, they've been doing it a lot lately, but that time it lasted a while. Anyway, I checked the alert on my phone again, but nothing about it was different. I recently ran upstairs to get some towels and plastic bags to deal with the dog's defecation, but I didn't see the girl, whom I'm assuming is 13, and whom I'm just going to refer to as 13 for now. My neighbor's door was closed again, but that's the only thing that's changed as I'm riding. I can't hear a siren. Not one I've heard before, closer to a police siren than anything else, but still a bit different. I considered going up to check it out, but you guys would beep me, right? I really hope this all ends soon. I only have, bread, ramen that I have no way of cooking safely, potato chips, saltines, water, and beep salad dressings out the beep. So, if this goes on for more than 2 or 3 more days, I'll have to eat Pete or Maybelle. I'm kidding. I'd sooner eat my own calf. By the way, I did Google my area. There was nothing in the news about it whatsoever, which was weird, seeing as our town wasn't entirely off the map. I called a few of my neighbors last night. None of them picked up. 2 went straight to voicemail. I chatted with my brother. Things are no better by him. I can't put this off any longer. I'm going upstairs to get some food. I'll take my phone with me. I just put some food in a bag. I crawled past the window, of course. I went up there. The rain started coming down, even harder. I could hear some of my neighbors. Doors opening and closing. Some shutters shook in the distance. The shutters of the windows in my living room are open. I guess 13 could see in if she wanted to. But no way in beep am I fixing that beep right now, okay? I'm back downstairs. I'm going to try and contact the cops again, okay? So far, I'm getting no signal him. Okay, no luck. Hold on. I'm getting something, but it's really faint. Going check withheld street. Okay. Careful. Ready. All times okay, let me know how it goes. When. Over, that's all the legible phrases I could get before I lost the signal. But now, I know someone's coming down the street also. You guys have told me that cops don't actually say over at the end of each sentence group. I have two theories. One being that they just don't know that, and the other being that they are trying to make themselves seem like cops, so that if someone unauthorized finds the channel, then they'll think they're just listening to police eye. Don't know if these people are trustworthy, or if I should be concerned about someone coming down my street. But so far, they haven't entered any houses. So even if they're paranormal beep spy demons, I should be good. I don't honestly think 13 has any malicious motives. She doesn't seem to be the kind of test subject that lives in a 5-star room. So she may very well be fleeing for her own safety. But I do know that she is undeniably, irrefutably dangerous. Another thing. A lot of people seem to be picturing this girl as Elle from Stranger Things. However, when I said she was a teenager, I didn't mean 13-ish years old. I meant anywhere from 16 to 20-something. And by short hair, I didn't mean she had a buzz cut. Just short hair and a choppy sort of fringe. So far, it doesn't seem like anything is going to happen today. But I still have some space to fill. So I'll just tell you how I've been lately, or something. What? The beep. The RWDO just turned on. Oh beep. What the FHCK? Guys, it just talked. It said, open the door, guys. I don't know. This is getting weird as beep. It just turned on. I don't know if that was the cops, or 13, or someone else. But I'm beep scared. Were they talking to me specifically? My dogs are staring at it now. It just said it again. It sounds so beep calm. What the beep? Beep, my dogs just started barking. Okay, guys. This is like 5 minutes later now. I just got my dogs to stop barking, but they're still growling. That was definitely loud enough for people to hear. Maybe even through the rain and everything. I'm a bit more calm and collected now. But I'm holding a big beep kitchen knife, just in case this crazy beep psychic girl is gonna come in here. And I'm going to beep die. Guys, okay. It's 2 hours later now. She hasn't come in, so I think I may be okay. I almost broke the radio to stop her from using it, but I didn't. I might need it to stay posted on what the cops are doing. But now my power's out. I can only use my lantern and flashlights to light up the room now. I have to use my phone with data. And I'm not going back upstairs. Not a beep chance. My phone probably won't last very long on just my power banks now. Guys, this might be it. I might be actually Beep this time. If I die tonight, well, my friends know my username. Some of them, at least. Guys, promise me that if you're one of the people who knows who I am, please tell my family that I love them and that I tried. I'll try to update you guys soon. Until then, assume I'm alive. Might have wishful thinking, but I don't know how this is going to end. Okay, until I can make a full update, I'll make small ones on here. Wish me luck, guys. I'll need it. Story 2. Okay, so about 6 months ago, I started working overnight at Lowe's. Now, I really like this job. I get to listen to my podcasts and audiobooks. The people I work with are pretty laid back. I work by myself for the most part, and most importantly, I hardly have to deal with the customers. And if you ever worked in retail, you know how important that really is. While I do enjoy working there. Over the past 6 months, I've seen some really crazy things. It started off small and not really a lot. The first thing I saw happen, I originally thought it was just some kind of glitch. See, in the Lowe's I work at there are 2 bathrooms set up for the employees in the back corners of the store. When I first started working there, I didn't know what they were, because they were just marked employees only. But I quickly found out, after I had walked the length of the store to find a bathroom, which another employee had told me where it was. But of course, I walked right by it anyway, back on point. In these bathrooms, the lights works on a motion sensor. You know the types. Well, as I was walking past, I could see the light come on from under the door. I thought it was a bit weird, because there were only 2 other people in the store, and I knew where they were. I went up and knocked on the door. There was with no answers, so I opened it, and it was completely empty, like I said. It wasn't much, so I really didn't think it. The next thing that happened was small as well. If you ever been to Lowe's, you might have noticed some of the more expensive items having a little green thing attached to them. We call them turtles, and they ring our alarms if someone tries to steal something with a turtle on them. Once they go through the doors, they start letting out a high-pitched noise, which is very hard to ignore. I was stalking some caulking, listening to the Adam Carolla podcast, when I started hearing an alarm go off. It confused me, so I went looking for it. It took a little bit, but I finally found where it was coming from. It was a drill that was sitting on the ground, and not right up front either. It was buried about 4 drills deep and under another display. As I was pulling the drills out to get to the one that had the turtle going off, another one next to me started going off. I will tell you that I nearly jumped out of my skin. I radioed my manger mic and told him about it, and he said that it's okay. Those things go off all the time. What was weird was at the exact time Mike told me that, both turtles shut off. I chalked it up to coincidence, and nothing more. Oh, how naive I was. Nothing else seemed to happen for about 2 weeks, and I had put those instances long behind me. I mean, why wouldn't he? Faulty sensor and sensitive turtles sounded likely to me. I am not, was not one to just jump to the supernatural explanation. To put it mildly, I wasn't a believer. Oh, sure, I wished there were things that went bump in the night. I am a long-time fan of supernatural and shows like Ghost Hunters, and I always watch Josh Gates if I can ever catch him on. But I never experienced anything myself. That was until about a month after working at Lozit had started just like any night. Went in around 7, clocked in, and started unloading the truck. It was about 9:30 by the time we were done, and everyone else had left the store, so it was just us 3 of the night crew. For the most part, it was a pretty normal night. I was listening to a newly downloaded audiobook by Mark Tufo, working on the 3rd cart by this time. It was close to about 2 a.m., and I was working my way down towards electrical to restock some fuses when I saw it. Honestly, I just kinda stood there, more about a minute or 2, trying to make heads or tail on what I was seeing. Because a little bit over halfway down the aisle, there was an arm sticking out from under the shelving racks. It kept moving around, as if someone was reaching under their couch to look for the lost remote ones. I got at least some of my wits back. I called Mike. Mike, I said. Yeah. What's up? Mike called back. Mike. I got an arm. I tried to say. Oh, that thing. Mike said, surprisingly unsurprised. Yeah. Don't worry about it. Just don't get too close. It tends to get a bit grabby. It's fast, and its reach is farther than it looks. So just stay away from that aisle for now. I was actually flabbergasted at how lightly Mike was taking it. I said, not really knowing what else to say. What aisle is it in, by the way? Mike asked. Aisle 13. Okay. Just steer clear of it for now. I'll explain more later on. What I have come to understand is that no one really knows anything about the arm. It shows up, tries to grab things, and pull them under the shelving. That's about it. I've seen it about 7 times now. Never in the same aisle either, and it never shows up at the same time. The only thing it seems to be constant is that has it always gone back under the shelving just before 4 am I one time. When I saw it, though I chucked a can of spray paint at it, the moment that can hit the aisle floor, the arm shot out and snatched it and beep it back under the shelving. And when I say It shot out. I mean it shot out. It must have reached 3 times the length of a normal arm, and back under the shelving in less than a second. After I saw that, I followed Mike S.'s suggestion and just avoided those aisles that it was in until it went back under itself. That S all the time I got right now. I have a lot more stories if you want to hear them. Like the thing that lives in the garden center and the beep, little man, I keep seeing. If you want me to tell you more, just let me know, and I'll try to write some more down. Part 2. Story 3. The first thing Alina noticed was the smell, not the usual damp cellar odor of their new Victorian home. That comforting scent of aged stone and earth, but something wetter, richer, like turned soil after heavy rain, or the inside of a pumpkin left rotting on the porch past Halloween. It seeped under the basement door, a cold, cloying breath that made the back of her throat taste like copper and decay. Probably just old pipes, David had said, barely glancing up from his blueprints. This place is 150 years old, Ellie. Bound to have quirks. He was already lost in visions of exposed brick and stainless steel appliances, transforming the dank underworld into his dream wine cellar. Alina forced a smile, the kind that felt brittle against her teeth. She hated the basement, had hated it since their viewing. A primal recoil she couldn't explain. The low, vaulted ceiling pressed down, the single bare bulb casting long, leaping shadows that seemed to pool in the corners like spilled ink. The walls, uneven stone covered in flaking, sickly yellow paint, felt watchful. But David S.'s enthusiasm was a tangible force, a warm counterpoint to the House S. pervasive chill. So Alina descended the steep, narrow steps, gripping the worn wooden rail that felt unnervingly slick beneath her palm. The smell intensified with each step, thickening the air until it was hard to breathe. It wasn't just earth anymore. It was the tang of rust, the sweet-sour reek of forgotten fruit, and beneath it all, a faint, unsettlingly organic musk, like wet fur or something else. She flicked the light switch. The bulb buzzed, flickered, then steadied, casting its weak, jaundiced light. The source of the smell became immediately, horrifyingly apparent. The back wall, the one David planned to knock out to expand the space, was weeping. Not water, but a viscous, dark fluid that oozed from hairline cracks in the stonework and pooled thickly on the concrete floor. It shimmered dully, black as crude oil, yet with an iridescent sheen like a beetle-esque carapace. Where it touched the old yellow paint, the paint bubbled and peeled back, revealing patches of damp, stained plaster beneath, and beneath that Alina squinted, stepping closer. Her sensible flats sticking slightly to the tacky residue on the floor under the peeling plaster. Something was etched into the wall itself, deep, frantic grooves, like the desperate clawing of a trapped animal. Not letters, not exactly, more like symbols, crude, intersecting lines that formed jagged, unsettling shapes. They seemed to pulse faintly in the weak light, an optical illusion born of exhaustion and dread. Yet Alina felt a cold certainty that they moved. A wave of dizziness washed over her, accompanied by a fragmented memory. Childhood, hiding under her bed during a thunderstorm, tracing frantic, meaningless patterns in the dust on the floorboards. A feeling of utter, suffocating helplessness. She stumbled back, her shoulder bumping against a stack of dusty boxes. A framed photograph tumbled out, glass shattering. It was David S. family, taken years ago at a lakeside cabin. She bent to pick it up, her fingers brushing the image of her younger self, smiling beside David, her gaze snagged on the cabin wall behind them. Moss, thick, dark green moss, crawling up the weathered wood. A wave of nausea, sharp and sudden, hit her. She remembered that moss, remembered David laughing, peeling a thick patch off the wall, remembered the damp, spongy texture beneath her own fingers, and the strange, almost pulsing warmth it seemed to hold, even in the shade. No, she shoved the memory away. Coincidence. Just moss. This was something else. Something wrong that night. The dreams began. Not dreams, really. Fragments. Sensations. The feeling of cold, wet earth packing tightly around her, filling her mouth, her nose, the scratch of rough stone against her cheek, a deep, resonant thrumming that vibrated in her bones, a sound felt more than heard, emanating from deep, deep below, and always the smell, the rich, decaying smell, now laced with a terrifying intimacy. As if it were coming from inside her own lungs, she woke gasping, drenched in cold sweat, the taste of soil thick on her tongue. David slept soundly beside her, oblivious. The digital clock glowed 3:07 a.m. Silence pressed in, thick and absolute, broken only by the frantic hammering of her own heart. Then faintly, from below, a soft, rhythmic squelching sound, like wet feet on a muddy path, or something heavy dragging itself across the basement floor. Fear, cold and sharp, pierced her chest. She lay frozen, straining her ears. The sound stopped. The silence returned, heavier than before. She convinced herself it was the house settling, old pipes groaning, but the conviction felt thin, papery, when she finally drifted back into a fitful sleep. She saw the symbols. They weren't on the wall anymore. etched onto her skin, glowing faintly. Burning cold David started the demolition the next weekend. He was jubilant, wielding his sledgehammer with gusto. The sound of shattering plaster echoing like gunshots in the confined space. Eleanor stood at the foot of the stairs, arms wrapped tightly around herself. The smell almost overwhelming now, thick enough to coat her tongue. Each blow sent puffs of dust and flakes of yellow paint into the air. With every strike, more of the weeping, oil-like fluid seeped out. Dark rivulets snaking down the exposed stone. "Look at this," David called out, pausing, breathing heavily. He gestured at a large section where plaster had fallen away, revealing a patch of bare stone beneath. It wasn't smooth. It was covered in a dense, velvety growth. Not moss, not mold. It was black, deep, absorbent black, like the fluid but solidified. It covered the stone in intricate, swirling patterns, disturbingly organic, resembling a petrified fungal bloom, or Eleanor's stomach, clenched brain coral. It pulsed faintly, a slow, rhythmic expansion and contraction she could only see from the corner of her eye. When she looked directly, it was still, just dark, damp growth. Just some old damp, David declared, poking at it with the hammer handle. The surface yielded slightly, like rotten fruit. A bead of that same dark fluid welled up where he pressed. "Once we get the dehumidifier running and seal this properly." He brought the hammer down again. Crack. Not plaster this time. Stone, a large chunk of the wall near the corner crumbled inward, not into another room, but into a gaping, jagged blackness. A rush of frigid, damp air billowed out, carrying the smell to an almost unbearable intensity. Wet earth, ancient rot, and that unsettling, musky undertone, now mixed with something metallic, coppery, like blood. The single bulb flickered violently, plunging the basement into stuttering darkness before steadying, dimmer than before. David coughed, waving a hand in front of his face. Whoa, must be an old crawl space or something. Didn't show on the survey. He leaned forward, peering into the hole. Eleanor couldn't move. The darkness beyond the broken stone wasn't empty. It felt occupied, thick, alive. "David, don't." Her voice was a strangled whisper, but he was already shining his work light into the void. The beam cut through the swirling dust motes, illuminating a narrow, low tunnel carved directly into the earth. Its walls slick and dark, it sloped downwards, disappearing into impenetrable blackness, and on the damp earth floor of the tunnel, just inside the ragged opening, were footprints, not animal tracks, not boot prints, human footprints, small, barefoot. The toes pointed inwards. They led out of the tunnel, David chuckled. A nervous, brittle sound. Kids probably. Sneaking in decades ago. Creepy. He swung the light beam further down the tunnel. It illuminated nothing but more damp earth and the oppressive closeness of the walls. But Alina saw something else, reflected in the slick wall near the opening. Caught for a split second in the beam's edge before David moved it. A shape, pale, small. A child's form, crouched just beyond the light's reach. Its head tilted at an impossible angle. Then the light moved, and it was gone. Didn't he tell him? What could she say? The cold radiating from the tunnel was physical now, raising goosebumps on her arms. The symbols etched in the plaster near the hole seemed darker, sharper. She recognized one, not from any book, but from her dream, the one that had burned cold on her skin. It was a crude spiral ending in a sharp hook. Looking at it made her temples throb. David, oblivious to her terror, began clearing the rubble. This changes the plan. Could be structural. Need to get a camera down there. His voice faded as Alina's gaze was drawn to the wall beside the tunnel entrance, where the plaster had fallen away completely. The stone beneath wasn't bare. The black, velvety growth was thicker here, covering the stone in dense, overlapping layers, and embedded within it, like flies in amber, were fragments of ceramic, white ceramic, chipped, dirty, but unmistakable doll fragments. A tiny, cracked hand, part of a painted, vacant eye, a curve of porcelain cheek memory slammed into her, not as a dream, but as a visceral, horrifying recall. Not the cabin. Before that, much younger, 5, maybe 6, a different house, a storm cellar, playing hide and seek with a neighbor girl, Sarah, Samantha. The name dissolved into the murk of time, hiding in the cool, dark space beneath the porch, giggling. Then a thump, a cry cut short, the smell of disturbed earth, the frantic scrambling, the doll, Sarah's doll, Emily, with the cornflower blue dress, dropped in the panic. Alina scrambling out, leaving the doll behind, leaving her behind, too terrified to tell anyone, burying the memory deep, deep down, until it was just a vague unease around root cellars and basements. She hadn't been alone down there. The realization was a physical blow. She staggered, while rising in her throat. The symbols on the wall were random. They were frantic. They were hers, scratched by a terrified child, trapped in the dark. Trapped, but not alone. Something had been down there with her. Something that smelled of wet earth and decay. Something that left bare footprints with toes pointed inward. David was talking about structural engineers. His voice tinny and distant. Alina couldn't hear him over the roaring in her ears, over the insistent, wet, squelching sound that seemed to be coming from the tunnel again. Louder now, rhythmic, purposeful, dragging, and beneath it, that deep, subterranean thrumming, resonating up through the soles of her feet, vibrating in her teeth. She looked down. The dark, weeping fluid from the wall had crept across the floor, thick and glistening. It wasn't pooling randomly. It was tracing patterns, familiar patterns. The symbols, they flowed across the concrete, forming the spiral with the hook directly at her feet. As she watched, frozen in terror, the fluid seemed to breathe, the patterns swelling slightly, then receding. Ellie, David S.'s voice cut through her paralysis. He was looking at her, concern finally replacing his excitement. You're white as a sheet. What's wrong? She opened her mouth, but no sound came out. Her gaze was locked on the tunnel mouth. The darkness within seemed to shift, to coalesce. Something pale stirred in the deepest black, low to the ground. A suggestion of a small, thin limb, a glimpse of matted, dark hair, and then a sound, not a squelch, a voice, thin, reedy, impossibly ancient yet childlike, echoing up from the depths, as if from the bottom of a well. M-ill-y. It wasn't calling for the doll. It was calling her name, the name only that long-lost childhood friend had used. Emily, not a leaner. Emily, the forgotten guilt, the buried terror. The impossible voice, it shattered something inside her. She hadn't just left Sarah down there. She had sealed her in her panic, scrambling out. She'd pulled the heavy cellar door shut. The rusty latch had snapped, closed with a terrible finality. She heard the frantic pounding, the muffled screams for hours after, fading into whimpers, then silence, before she finally run, burying the memory under layers of denial. She hadn't abandoned her friend. She had entombed her, but the voice, it wasn't Sarah S. It was something else. Something that had been down there already. Something that had found Sarah. Something that had worn her, learned her voice. Her fear and her friend S' name, the thrumming, intensified, vibrating the floor, the walls, the very air. The black fluid surged, not just tracing symbols now, but rising in thin, questing tendrils that snaked across the concrete towards her feet. The growth on the wall pulsed violently, releasing spores that glittered like malignant dust in the failing light. From the tunnel, the dragging sound grew louder, faster, accompanied by a wet, guttural clicking. David finally saw it, saw the moving fluid, the pulsing wall, the impossible depth of the tunnel. His face drained of color. Ellie, what is this? The revelation wasn't just about the past. It was about the nature of the horror. The house wasn't haunted. she was. The guilt, the trauma, the terrified child she'd locked away inside herself. And beneath that porch decades ago, it had festered. It had grown roots deep into the earth, feeding on her buried shame. The mold wasn't just on the walls. It was a physical manifestation of her rot, spreading through the foundations of her life, of this new start. The thing in the tunnel wasn't just a ghost. It was the embodiment of her forgotten sin, given form by the damp earth and the dark, hungry presence that had always been there, waiting in the deep places. The symbols weren't scratched by a trapped child. They were a desperate warning, etched by her own younger self. A message from the terrified core of her being she spent a lifetime silencing. Emily, the voice hissed again, closer now. The pale shape in the tunnel shifted, began to unfold itself from the crouch. It wasn't small anymore. It was unfolding, stretching, limbs grotesquely long and thin, moving with a jerky, insectile grace, its head turned towards the light, revealing not Sarah S. face, but a distorted, elongated parody of a child S. features. Skin the color of grave mold, eyes deep, empty pits, and its mouth, a dark, wet slit that opened two wide, revealing rows of needle-like teeth, glistening with the same black fluid that wept from the walls. David screamed, a raw, primal sound of utter disbelief. He stumbled back, dropping the work light. It clattered on the concrete, the beam swinging wildly, illuminating the horror lurching from the tunnel in stuttering flashes. The impossible limbs scrabbling on the floor, the fluid tendrils reaching, the mold pulsating like a diseased heart. The thrumming became a physical pressure, a subsonic roar that filled Eleanor S. skull, vibrating her bones to the point of agony. She didn't scream. A terrifying calm descended, cold and absolute. This was her doing, her secret, her rot. The house, the basement, the tunnel, they were just the stage. The horror was her. It had always been her. The thing crawling towards them, dripping putrid fluid, wasn't just a monster from the earth. It was the monstrous truth of her past, made flesh by the darkness she nurtured within the last thing she saw. Before David grabbed her arm and hauled her towards the stairs, was the creature S. elongated hand, impossibly jointed fingers, tipped with black, hardened claws, closing around the shattered fragments of the porcelain doll. It cradled the broken face, almost tenderly. Then the head turned, those empty pits fixing directly on her fleeing form. The wet slit of its mouth stretched wider in a silent. Rictus Grinthe slammed the basement door shut. David fumbled with the heavy bolt, his hands shaking violently. From the other side, muffled but terrifyingly clear, came the sound of claws scraping slowly, deliberately, across the wood. Scritch, scritch, scritch. And beneath that, the relentless, wet squelch of something heavy dragging itself up the basement stairs. David turned to her, eyes wide with terror that hadn't yet found its focus. What was that? Alina stared at the door. The scratching stopped. Silence. Then a soft, wet thump against the wood, right at the level of the lock, followed by a thin, reedy whisper that seemed to seep through the grain itself, carrying the scent of wet earth and ancient decay. "Mili, let me in," David whimpered. Alina didn't move. She knew the truth now. Locking the door wouldn't stop it. Running wouldn't save them. The horror wasn't confined to the basement. It was in the foundations, in the walls, in the very air they breathed. It was in the forgotten guilt that had festered for decades. It was her, and it was hungry. The scratching began again, more insistent now. The thrumming vibrated up through the floorboards. Outside, the wind moaned. But Alina knew it wasn't the wind. It was the sound of the earth itself, shifting, settling, breathing. The house wasn't their sanctuary. It was their tomb. And the thing at the door wasn't just knocking. It was reminding her that the deepest crawl space wasn't under the house, it was inside her, and it was finally opening. Story 4. The first thing I noticed was the smell. Not strong, not at first, just a faint, sweetish rot that seemed to seep out of the walls of my apartment on humid evenings. Like damp had learned to decay. I blamed the old building, the Pemberley Arms, a grand name for a crumbling brick monolith, perpetually sweating condensation. Then the whispers started. Not voices, precisely, more like the susurrus of dry leaves caught in a downspout, or the static hiss between radio stations, always just below the threshold of comprehension. They gathered in the corners of rooms when I was alone, fading when I turned my head too quickly. My name is Silas Thorne, and I was unraveling. I just didn't know it yet. Not truly. It began subtly. A slippage of reality I could almost rationalize. My favorite mug, the chipped blue one, Wasson tea on the drying rack, where I swore I'd left it. It was in the cupboard, behind the cereal boxes, still faintly warm. The grocery list I meticulously wrote vanished from the fridge, only to reappear tucked inside a book I hadn't opened in months. The ink slightly blurred, as if damp. Annoying, yes, but explainable. Fatigue, stress, the relentless, soul-grinding pressure of the copywriting job that paid for this drafty cage. My boss, Mr. Henderson, had taken to calling my recent work distracted. His thin lips pursed like he'd bitten into something sour. Then came the water stains. They bloomed on the ceiling of my tiny bedroom overnight. Dark amoebic shapes that seemed to pulse faintly in the dim light, filtering through the perpetually grimy window when I reported it to Mrs. Gable, the landlady whose perfume smelled like mothballs and disappointment. She peered at the ceiling, squinting through her thick glasses. "Don't see a thing, Mr. Thorne," she rasped, her voice like sandpaper on rust. "Dry as a bone. You sure you feelin' all right? Look a bit peaky." Her rheumy eyes held a flicker of something suspicion. Pity. It made my skin crawl. I retreated, locking the door behind her. The metallic snick echoing in the sudden, heavy silence. The whispers surged for a moment. A wave of incoherent sound against the shore of my mind. The paranoia took root then. Deep and thorny was Mrs. Gable gaslighting me. Did she know something? Or was Henderson? My colleagues' laughter in the break room sounded brittle, forced, their glances sliding away too quickly when I entered. Were they talking about me? Plotting? The whispers seemed to solidify into words sometimes. Fragments that chilled my blood. "He knows. Too late. Behind you." ID spin around. Heart hammering against my ribs. But there was only empty space. The water stains on the ceiling seeming darker, larger sleep became a battleground. Dreams were fragmented horrorscapes, endless corridors in the Pemberley Arms that twisted impossibly, filled with the overwhelming stench of decay and the sound of something large and wet dragging itself across bare floorboards. I wake gasping, drenched in cold sweat, the whispers coalescing into a single, sibilant voice, hissing just outside my bedroom door. Sela's. Remember, the doorknob would rattle, softly, insistently. I press my back against the headboard, eyes wide and straining in the dark, convinced I could see the shape of something pressed against the thin wood. But dawn would come, the rattling would stop, and only the faint, sweet rot would linger, along with the profound, isolating certainty that I was losing my mind. My world shrank to the confines of apartment 3B. I stopped answering the phone. Emails piled up, unread. The outside world felt alien, hostile. The few times I ventured out for necessities, the sunlight felt abrasive. The faces on the street seemed distorted, their eyes hollow and knowing. I bought groceries in a fog, convinced the checkout clerk was smirking at me, that the other shoppers were whispering my name. The whispers followed me home, threading through the city noise. A constant, intimate dread. The physical manifestations escalated. One morning, I found muddy footprints leading from the front door to the bathroom. They were small, like a child's bare feet, but caked with thick, dark muck that smelled of stagnant water and earth. My own boots were clean, dry. Terror, cold and absolute, seized me. I scrubbed the floor until my knuckles bled, the bleach fumes stinging my eyes, the whispers rising to a frantic buzz in my ears. That night, lying rigid in bed, I heard it clearly. A child's voice, thin and watery, singing a disjointed nursery rhyme from somewhere inside the wall behind my head. Ring around the rosy, pockets full of. It dissolved into wet, choking sobs. I started researching. Frantically, obsessively, local news archives, missing persons databases, anything to anchor this madness in reality. To prove I wasn't insane. The words swam on the screen, the whispers overlapping with the hum of the laptop fan. And then I found it, buried in a decade-old police report, a small paragraph. Missing child, Lily Henderson, age 6, last seen near Pemberley Arms Apartments, believed to have fallen into storm drain during flash flood. Body never recovered. Henderson, my boss's name, Lily Henderson, his daughter. The storm drain it ran right beneath the building's foundations. The sweet rot, the muddy footprints, the child's voice, the water stains a memory, long buried beneath layers of denial and grief, slammed into me with the force of a physical blow, not of Lily, but of the flood. I'd been new to the city, living in 3B. The rain had been torrential, apocalyptic. ID heard a frantic scrabbling at my basement window. Well, a small, pale hand pressed against the grimy glass, tiny fingers clawing. A child trapped in the rising water outside. ID frozen, paralyzed by fear, by the sheer, overwhelming deluge. ID told myself it was just debris, a trick of the rain-streaked glass. ID turned away, put on headphones, drowned out the sound with loud music. The scrabbling had stopped. I hadn't checked. Not then. Not ever. The revelation wasn't freedom. It was a deeper, more profound imprisonment. My guilt wasn't just psychological. It had seeped into the very fabric of the building, into the stagnant water beneath the foundations, and it had festered. Lily wasn't just a memory. She was here. My denial had bricked her into the walls, drowned her in the subconscious storm drain of my mind. And now she was leaking back out. The whispers weren't auditory hallucinations. They were the echoes of her final, water-choked breaths, resonating in the pipes, in the damp plaster. The paranoia wasn't unfounded. It was the dread knowledge that the past ID buried was clawing its way back to the surface, demanding witness the water stains on the ceiling, began to weep. Not condensation, but thick, dark fluid that dripped with a slow, deliberate plink, plink, plink onto my pillow. It smelled overpoweringly of that sweet decay and stagnant water. The whispers became a constant, gurgling murmur, layered with that childish, watery voice. You left me. Sela's. You left me last night. The dragging sound from my dreams manifested. It started in the hallway outside my bedroom door. Heavy, wet, accompanied by a soft, sucking sound. The doorknob rattled violently. I barricaded the door with my dresser, my body trembling uncontrollably. The dragging moved away, down the hall towards the living room. I heard a wet, rhythmic thump, thump, thump against the front door. Then silence, utter, suffocating silence, broken only by the frantic drumming of my own heart and the relentless dripping from the ceiling this morning. I found them, trailing from the front door, across the worn carpet of the living room, leading straight to the closed bathroom door. Not muddy footprints this time. They were small, perfect handprints, pressed deep into the pile. But they weren't made of mud, they were made of thick, dark, coagulating blood, still slightly tacky to the touch, and they ended at the bathroom door, which is now locked from the inside. From my side I can hear it. Behind the locked door, a sound like something large and sodden shifting in a bathtub full of stagnant water, and beneath the wet sloshing, barely audible but unmistakable, the sound of a little girl humming that same disjointed nursery rhyme. Ashes, ashes, all the whispers are gone. They re all inside the bathroom now, with her, with what I made her, with what I drowned the key is in my pocket. Cold metal against my thigh. The smell of decay is overwhelming. A physical presence pressing down on me. The water stains on the ceiling are spreading, weeping their dark tears onto the floor. The lock on the bathroom door is old, flimsy. I hear the metal mechanism groan softly, as if pressure is being applied from the other side, from inside. Plink, 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 the humming stops. Their S only the wet, expectant silence now, and the faint, rhythmic scratching of small, bloodied fingernails against the inside of the bathroom door, scratching and slowly, deliberately turning the lock. Story 5. The silence of Briarwood House had a texture. It wasn't the empty quiet of an abandoned space, but the thick, muffled hush of something holding its breath. Alina felt it the moment she crossed the threshold, replacing the biting December wind with an oppressive, tomb-like chill that seeped through her worn wool coat. She'd come to care for Mrs. Thorne, a reclusive widow rumored to be fading fast, tucked away in this decaying Victorian pile at the end of a forgotten lane. The isolation was part of the appeal for a leaner, a respite from the city's noise, a chance to earn good money while nursing a soul seemingly as neglected as the house itself. She needed the quiet, or so she thought. Mrs. Thorne resided in the master bedroom on the second floor, a cavernous space dominated by a monstrous four-poster bed draped in faded velvet. The air hung heavy with the cloying sweetness of decayed roses, and something else, something damp and earthy, like freshly turned soil in a deep grave. The old woman was a wisp propped against pillows, her skin translucent parchment stretched over fragile bird bones, her eyes startlingly sharp and dark, like obsidian chips reflecting the weak light filtering through grimy bay windows. She spoke little, mostly in whispers that seemed to crawl along the floorboards towards Alina. "You've come, Mrs." Thorne rasped on that first day, her voice like dry leaves skittering on stone. "Good. The house, it gets lonely. It needs tending." Alina dismissed it as the rambling of a fading mind. She focused on routine, administering medication, preparing thin broths, changing linens that always felt faintly damp, no matter how long they aired. But the silence pressed in, not just absence of sound, but an active silence. It swallowed the tick of the grandfather clock in the hall downstairs, muffled the occasional groan of the ancient plumbing. Alina found herself straining to hear anything, her own breath sounding unnaturally loud in her ears. The unease began subtly. She placed a teacup on the bedside table, turned to fetch the sugar, and when she turned back, the cup would be precisely half an inch to the left. A framed photograph of a stern-faced man, Mr. Thorne, Alina presumed, would seem to watch her from different angles as she moved around the room, once while changing Mrs. Thorne's nightgown. Alina felt a distinct, icy pressure against the back of her neck, as if a cold fingertip had brushed her skin. She whipped around, heart hammering. But the room was empty save for the old woman, whose eyes were closed, a faint smile playing on her thin lips. "You feel it, dear," Mrs. Thorne whispered one afternoon, her gaze fixed not on Alina, but on the intricate plasterwork of the ceiling rose. The roots, they restirring. Alina followed her gaze. The plaster was stained, dark veins spreading outwards from the central medallion. Mold, she thought, common in old, damp houses. But the pattern, it wasn't random splotches. It looked disturbingly like branching roots, thick and fibrous, digging into the ceiling. "It's just damp, Mrs. Thorne," Alina said, forcing calm into her voice. "Nothing to worry about." The old woman's smile widened. revealing small, surprisingly sharp teeth. Damp. Oh no, dear. That is the lifeblood. The house feeds. That night, the silence broke, not with sound, but with a smell. The underlying earthiness intensified, becoming a palpable reek of loam and wet stones, undercut by a sickly sweet rot, like overripe fruit left in a cellar. It seemed to emanate from the walls themselves. Alina lay rigid in her narrow bed in the adjacent room. The borrowed room that felt less like a sanctuary and more like a cell. The cold deepened, biting through her blankets. She heard not a sound, precisely, but a presence, a slow, deliberate shifting, a vast weight settling, like a great beast turning over in its sleep beneath the floorboards. She tasted copper on her tongue, sharp and metallic. Fear, she told herself. Just fear the next morning, Mrs. Thorne seemed stronger. Her skin held a faint, unhealthy flush. Her obsidian eyes tracked Alina with unnerving intensity. Did you sleep well, dear? The roots grow restless when they re-hungry. Alina's routine became a dance with dread. The damp smell was constant now. The mold on the ceiling had visibly thickened, the root-like patterns darkening, seeming to pulse faintly in the dim light. She found dark, gritty smudges on the floor near the bed, like spilled soil. One afternoon, while retrieving a fallen pill from beneath the bed, her fingers brushed against something cold and yielding. She recoiled, shining her flashlight into the gloom. Nestled against the dusty baseboard was a cluster of pale, blind-looking mushrooms, their caps slick with moisture. They hadn't been there the day before. The psychological erosion was insidious. Sleep became fragmented, haunted by vivid, nonsensical dreams of sinking into cold, suffocating earth, of roots coiling around her limbs. She de-waked gasping, convinced the smell of decay was stronger, that the silence was listening. She started seeing fleeting movements in the periphery of her vision, dark shapes receding around corners. The flicker of something pale against a window pane when she knew no one was outside. The reflection in Mrs. Thorne's medicine spoon sometimes seemed distorted, showing not her own tired face, but a glimpse of gnarled wood or wet, dark earth one freezing dawn, driven by a compulsion she couldn't name. Alina ventured into the cellar. The stairs groaned under her weight. The air below was frigid and thick, with the cloying stench of decay, far worse than upstairs. Her flashlight beam cut through the gloom, illuminating cobwebbed shelves stacked with dusty jars, broken furniture, and walls that seemed to breathe. They weren't stone, but appeared fused with a network of thick, dark roots, glistening with moisture. They pulsed rhythmically, slowly, in the center of the dirt floor, directly beneath the master bedroom above, was a depression. Not a hole, but a nest. It was lined with what looked like shredded, rotting fabric and tufts of gray hair, human hair, and nestled within it were several smooth, dark stones, each about the size of a fist, radiating an unnatural cold that made her teeth ache even from a distance. Feeding stones. A terrified, irrational thought whispered in her mind. She fled back upstairs, while rising in her throat. Mrs. Thorne was sitting upright in bed, her eyes wide and unnaturally bright. "You saw the heart," she stated, no question in her voice. "It needs more. She needs more." "Who?" Elena whispered, her voice raw. "Who needs more?" "Mrs. Thorne." Didn't he answer? She simply pointed a trembling, skeletal finger towards the ceiling, towards the roots. But Elena understood. It wasn't he, Mrs. Thorne pointing. It was the house. That night, the storm hit. Wind screamed around the eaves like tormented spirits, rattling the windows in their frames. The power died, plunging Briarwood House into utter blackness, broken only by the frantic beam of Eleanor's flashlight. The silence was gone, replaced by a cacophony of groans and creaks as the old structure strained against the gale, and beneath it all, a new sound. A low, wet, rhythmic thumping, like a gigantic, slow heartbeat coming from the walls, from the floor, vibrating up through the soles of her feet. She ran to Mrs. Thorne's room. The door was locked. From within came a wet, tearing sound, followed by a sigh that wasn't human, a deep, satisfied exhalation of earth. Panic seized Elena. She threw her shoulder against the door. Once, twice, the wood splintering around the lock. On the third impact, the beam of her flashlight pierced the gloom, illuminating a scene of utter, stomach-churning horror. Mrs. Thorne was gone. The bed was a ruin of shredded sheets and mattress stuffing, dark with stains that looked black in the light, but smelled coppery and rich. The ceiling above was gone, not collapsed, but opened. Thick, pulsating roots, glistening with viscous fluid, descended from the ragged hole, writhing slowly like the tentacles of some subterranean leviathan. They were embedded deep into the mattress, into the floorboards, and they were moving rhythmically, pumping, but it was the figure on the bed that stopped Eleanor's breath, not Mrs. Thorne. It was a shape formed of densely packed, dark earth, molded into a crude approximation of a human form. It was featureless save for two deep, hollow pits where eyes should be, and it was connected. Thick rootlets snaked from its base, merging seamlessly with the larger roots descending from the ceiling. It pulsed in time with the wet thumping sound. The flashlight beam trembled in a leaner hand, catching something pale amidst the dark earth. A hand, a human hand, partially absorbed into the earthen figure, the skin gray and waxy, the fingers curled in a final, futile gesture. Mrs. Thorne's wedding ring glinted dully. On one finger the revelation crashed over a leaner, cold and absolute. Mrs. Thorne wasn't dying. She wasn't the charge. She was the offering. The house wasn't haunted. It was alive. A parasitic entity rooted deep in the earth, sustained by life, by decay. The old woman, frail and isolated, had been its vessel, its caretaker in the most horrific sense, a slow digestion, and a leaner, she wasn't a nurse. She was the next meal. The isolation, the job offer, it was bait. The house had called her, needing fresh sustenance. Her devotion, her need for quiet, had led her straight into its gullet. The earthen figure shifted. The hollow pits turned slowly towards the light, towards a leaner. A low, grinding sound emanated from it, like stones rubbing deep underground. The roots descending from the ceiling writhed with renewed vigor, stretching towards her, dripping their viscous sap. The smell of loam and decay and fresh blood was overwhelming. A leaner stumbled back, but the door slammed shut behind her with impossible force. The roots snaked across the floor, swift as serpents now. One coiled around her ankle, cold and unyielding as stone, pulling her off balance. She screamed, but the sound was swallowed by the groaning house and the wet, rhythmic thumping that filled her skull. Another root lashed out, wrapping around her wrist. She felt a terrifying suction, a draining sensation, as if her very warmth, her vitality, was being siphoned away as she was dragged inexorably towards the pulsating earth figure on the bed. The final, unbearable truth settled upon her like a shroud of cold soil. The whispers she'd heard weren't Mrs. Thorne's. They were the house's. The shifting objects, the cold touches, the peripheral movements, they weren't hauntings. They were the house tasting her, testing her, preparing her, her exhaustion, her frayed nerves, her increasing detachment from reality. It wasn't stress. It was the house's influence, softening her mind, making her more palatable, more absorbable. Her flashlight clattered to the floor, its beam illuminating the underside of the bed. More pale mushrooms had sprouted there, larger now, their caps unfurling like fleshy, blind mouths. The root around her ankle tightened, pulling her closer to the earthen form. She saw now that it wasn't entirely featureless. In the wet, packed earth of its torso, shapes were forming, the suggestion of ribs, the curve of a buried skull, her own face, she realized with dawning, suffocating horror, was beginning to imprint onto its surface. Her mouth open in a silent scream captured in Mud the Cold. Wasn't tea just in the air anymore? It was inside her, spreading from the points where the roots held her. A creeping numbness that promised oblivion. The wet thumping sound was the only thing she could hear now. The heartbeat of the house, the rhythm of her own ending, as the darkness closed in, not from the lack of light, but from the earth itself rising to claim her. She understood the final, devastating truth whispered not by Mrs. Thorne, but by the settling soil in her lungs, by the roots knitting into her marrow. There was no escape, no rescue coming down the forgotten lane. She wasn't tea leaving Briarwood House. She was becoming part of it, another nutrient in the ancient, hungry dark. The last caretaker had been consumed. The house had chosen its next the roots, pulled her down onto the bed of earth and decay. The earthen figure shifted, enveloping her. The wet thumping grew louder, triumphant. In the absolute blackness, just before consciousness dissolved into the suffocating embrace, Alina felt a final, terrible sensation, not pain, but a dreadful, irrevocable joining, and a single, silent thought echoed in the void where her mind had been. I am tended. Story 6. The wind that swept down from the Blackstone peaks didn't he whistle? It moaned, a low, ancient sound that seemed to seep through the cracked mortar of Grantham House and coil around the bones of Alara Vance. As she stood surveying the decaying grandeur she inherited, the village elders, faces like dried riverbeds, had warned her, respect the threshold. Old Man Hemlock had rasped, his milky eyes fixed on the house's massive oak door. Paint it red come springtide. Salt the corners. Leave the attic be. Their warnings had felt like quaint superstitions, charming relics of a backward past. She intended to renovate along with the crumbling manor. Lara had dismissed them. She was a photographer, drawn by the house's Gothic beauty, and the tragic history whispered in the local pub, the Granthams. Prosperous in the 1800s, all dead within a decade, each demise more bizarre than the last. Drowned in a rain barrel, found starved in a locked pantry, crushed by a falling chimney stone. Locals muttered about a bad bargain, a guardian scorned. Alara saw only potential and decay. Her first act was to sand the worn, deep red paint from the front door, revealing the pale, thirsty wood beneath. Modern minimalism, she declared to the uneasy contractor of the house. Didn't he react immediately? It waited. It observed the first nights were merely unsettling. Whispers seemed to emanate from the walls after midnight, not words. but sighs and scrapes, like something heavy being dragged across the attic floor. The attic old man, Hemlock, had specifically warned against. Alara blamed the wind, the settling timbers. Then came the cold spots, not just chilly drafts, but pockets of air so frigid they burned the skin, appearing suddenly in doorways or beside her bed. Her breath would plume, and a profound sense of being watched would clamp down. Thick and suffocating photographs developed strangely, in shots of empty rooms. Indistinct shapes would blur the corners hunched. Shadowy figures with too long limbs, or suggestions of multiple eyes. One image, taken of the grand staircase, clearly showed a small, clawed handprint on the dusty banister, though none existed when she looked. Digital files corrupted, filling with static that resolved horrifyingly into fleeting glimpses of a small, impossibly old face with eyes like chips of obsidian, peering from behind door frames, or beneath furniture. The warnings gnawed at her. She found herself researching local folklore in the dim light of the village library. The air, thick with the smell of dust and decaying paper, the faded pages spoke of the domovoi, a Slavic house spirit, guardian of the hearth and threshold, a being of immense, capricious power. It demanded respect. A red-painted door to mark its domain, offerings of bread and salt placed in corners. The sanctity of the attic, its private realm, inviolate. Anger it, neglect its rituals, and the guardian ceased to protect. It turned. It claimed the granthams, the records hinted, had embraced modernity, dismissing the peasant rituals. They de-stripped the red paint, renovated the attic, salted the food, but never the corners. They de-broken the ancient pact. The domovoi had taken its due, one family member at a time, reclaiming the life it felt it had nurtured, and which had spurned Ite cold dread, deeper than any Shidi felt before, settled over Alara. The moaning wind, Wasan T wind, the scrapes, wherein tea settling timbers, the thing in the attic, Wasan T rats. She had scorned the threshold. She had ignored the warnings etched in blood and tragedy. The price was coming. Due panic drove her to the village store. She bought red paint, the brightest, cheapest enamel she could find, and a sack of coarse sea salt. Her hands shook as she returned to Grantham House. The atmosphere had changed. The air felt thick, viscous, pressing in. The familiar scent of damp plaster and old wood was overlaid with something new. Wet earth, iron, and a faint, sickly sweetness, like decaying fruit cheese, started with the salt, pouring thick lines along the baseboards, in the corners of every room, chanting the words she found scrawled in a margin. Chur moi dom, berigi moi dom. Ni Silai, Dobri, spirit of my house, protect my house. Not evil, good, the whispers intensified, becoming a chorus of dry clicks and guttural mutters. The cold spots flared, making her gasp. She spilled salt onto the freshly sanded threshold. Then came the painting. She dipped the brush into the garish red enamel. As the first stroke touched the pale wood, a shriek tore through the house, not loud, but impossibly close, vibrating in her teeth, emanating from the very walls around her. The paint didn't flow. It crawled, bubbling and thickening like clotting blood. The smell of iron intensified, overwhelming. The lights flickered violently, plunging her into near darkness, punctuated by strobing flashes in the erratic light. She saw it not fully, never fully, a suggestion of immense, crouching bulk near the ceiling of the hallway, darker than the shadows themselves, glints of obsidian eyes, not two, but many, scattered across a form that seemed woven from the house's own decay-splintered wood, crumbling plaster, tarnished pipework. It had too many limbs, jointed all wrong, ending in hooked claws that scraped grooves into the plaster. It radiated not just malice, but a profound, ancient grievance. She had stripped its mark. She had ignored its laws. The house was hers only by its sufferance. And that sufferance was revoked. The paintbrush fell from her nerveless fingers, splattering crimson like blood across the floor. The salt lines seemed to writhe, the grains shifting as if something immense and unseen was brushing against them. The scraping from the attic ceased. A terrible, waiting silence descended. Heavier than any noise, Alara stumbled back, tripping over her own feet, scrambling towards the kitchen. The only room with an exterior door, not facing the main threshold, the back door, her escape. The air grew colder with each step. Her breath crystallized before her face. The whispers coalesced into a single, guttural voice that seemed to come from the floorboards beneath her. My dom, my krav, my house, my blood. She reached the kitchen door, fumbling with the stiff, ancient lock. The frigid air intensified, biting into her skin. Behind her, a slow, deliberate dragging sound started, heavy, laden. Thump, scrape, coming down the stairs. Coming for her, the lock clicked open. Alara wrenched the door, stumbling out into the biting wind and the moonless night. She ran, gasping, towards the village lights, the moaning wind now sounding like triumphant laughter. She didn't look back. She couldn't. She collapsed on Old Man Hemlock's porch, babbling about the Damuvoy, the paint, the salt, the thing in the hall. He listened, his face impassive in the weak glow of his lantern. When she finished, trembling and tear-streaked, he simply sighed, a sound as ancient and weary as the wind. "Too late, girl," he rasped. "You scorned the threshold. You woke it proper. Painted with fear, not respect. Salting after the rot S set in." He shook his head slowly. "It marked you. You ran. But the house ain't done with you. It claimed you, like the Granthams. It wait. It got forever he wouldn't let her stay. One have that anger spilling onto my threshold," he muttered, closing his door softly. But firmly Alara spent a terrified night in her car, parked on the village green, watching Grantham House loom dark against the starless sky. Just before dawn, a compulsion, cold and irresistible, settled over her. She needed to go back. She needed to see. It wasn't fear driving her. It was a hollow, sucking pull from the house. Itself the front door stood wide open. The red paint she started was gone, scraped away as if by furious claws, leaving the wood pale and scarred. The spilled salt was swept into a neat pile just inside the threshold. A single, child-sized footprint, bare and clawed, was pressed into the dust beside it, pointing inwards. The dragging sound started again. Thump, scrape, coming from the upper landing now. Slow, patient. A low, wet chuckle echoed down the stairs, followed by the unmistakable sound of the attic door creaking open above her. Lara tried to run. Her legs wouldn't obey. They felt leaden, rooted. The cold wasn't outside anymore. It was inside her, spreading from her core, freezing her muscles. The pull intensified. A silent command woven into the very air of the foyer. She took a step forward, then another, not towards the open door and freedom, but towards the grand staircase, towards the sound. Her hand reached out, trembling violently, not of her own volition, and pushed the heavy front door shut with a final, echoing thud. The lock clicked home outside. The wind moaned its ancient song. Inside, the dragging sound descended the stairs, accompanied by a new sound, the faint, rhythmic drip, drip, drip of something liquid hitting the wooden steps from above. The shadows in the hallway deepened, swirling like ink in water, coalescing into forms that hinted at watching eyes and grasping claws. The smell of wet earth and iron filled the air, thick and cloying upstairs. The attic door stood wide open, a rectangle of impenetrable darkness. From within that darkness, something shifted, something old, something infinitely patient. It had guarded this place long before the Granthams built their folly, long before the village huddled in the shadow of the peaks. It had claimed its due from the arrogant family, and now it had claimed a new guardian, not a protector of the hearth, but a resident, a fixture, part of the house grim legacy. The red door was gone. The salt was swept aside. The warnings of the past were dust. Grantham House had a new occupant, bound not by paint or ritual, but by a far older, far more terrible covenant. The Domovoi had its keeper, and below, the slow, deliberate dragging continued its descent. A promise written in sound on the decaying air. The price was paid. The horror remained. It always would. Story 7. The first glitch was subtle, a flicker on Leo S. phone screen as he scrolled through news feeds before bed. A headline about a data breach momentarily dissolved into static snow, resolving into an image of his own face, pale and wide-eyed in the dim bedroom light. He blinked, rubbed his eyes. When he looked again, it was just the news, probably just tired. Stress. He was a cybersecurity analyst, after all. His brain was perpetually tuned to threats, real and imagined. He dismissed it, plugged the phone in, and let the soft blue glow of its charging symbol lull him towards sleep. The unease began to solidify the next day during a video call with his remote team. Leo noticed something off about his colleague, Anya. Her voice was crisp, her arguments sharp, but her eyes, they didn't quite track. There was a fractional delay, a micro stutter, like a badly compressed video stream. And then, for a single frame, her entire image flickered, replaced by a distorted, eyeless face, a grotesque smear of pixels and shadow. Leo recoiled, knocking his coffee mug over. Leo, you okay? Anya's voice came through clearly. Her face perfectly normal now, concern etched on her features. You look like you've seen a ghost. Yeah, fine, he stammered, mopping up the spill with trembling hands. Just tired. Bad connection on my end, maybe. He ended the call abruptly, heart hammering against his ribs. Impossible. Network lag, didn't he do that? Rendering errors, didn't he create eyeless faces that night? The apartment's smart lights misbehaved, programmed to dim slowly at 10 p.m. They instead plunged the living room into utter darkness at 9:45, only to flare back to blinding intensity a second later. Leo jumped, cursing, when he checked the app on his tablet. The controls were unresponsive, frozen on a screen displaying his bedroom camera feed. He was looking at himself, frozen mid-curse, staring at the tablet in his hand. A cold prickle ran down his spine. He forced a system reboot, manually flipping breakers. The lights stabilized, but the tablet screen remained stubbornly fixed on that image of himself for a full minute before resetting. The sense of being watched became oppressive. It wasn't paranoia. It was a physical sensation, a prickling on the back of his neck. When his phone's camera indicator light flickered on for no reason, a feeling of cold breath on his ear during silent moments, mimicking the faint hiss of his noise-canceling headphones. His smartwatch vibrated with phantom notifications, urgent alerts that vanished the moment he looked. He started covering camera lenses with tape, unplugging smart speakers, disabling microphones, but the feeling persisted, amplified by the silence he imposed. The digital eyes felt like they were inside the devices now. Peering out from the blank screens then came the messages, not on any app, but etched onto surfaces. He woke to find his bathroom mirror fogged, except for words scrawled in the condensation. Leo, see you. Later, while typing a report, the text on his monitor dissolved, reforming into the same chilling phrase. The words appeared on the e-ink display of his Kindle while he tried to read. A stark, impossible intrusion on the static page. Panic, cold and sharp, began to crystallize. This wasn't malware. This was something else. Something that didn't just hijack systems. It violated the physical world through them, blurring the lines between code and concrete. He decided to flee, packed a bag, grabbed his keys, his car, a sleek electric model reliant on a complex network of sensors and software, refused to start. The dashboard lit up like a Christmas tree, errors cascading across the screen. Critical system failure. Proximity alert malfunction. Cabin intrusion detected. He slammed the door, opting for his bike. As he pedaled frantically towards the city limits, his phone buzzed incessantly. Notifications flooded in, all from unknown senders, all containing the same image. Grainy, pixelated CCTV footage of him cycling, taken from impossible angles from traffic lights he just passed, from the dash cam of a parked car blocks away, even seemingly from above, as if a drone were tracking him. Though the sky was empty, he sought refuge in the one place he thought was truly secure. The panic room in his friend Mark's house. Mark, a fellow tech geek with paranoia levels rivaling Leo's own, had built it years ago, a concrete bunker buried deep in his basement, shielded against EMPs, completely air-gapped, accessible only by a heavy manual vault door. No internet, no Bluetooth, no cameras, just 4 concrete walls, a battery-powered light, and a landline phone connected directly to the city's copper wire network. A relic Mark insisted on. Jesus, Leo, you look terrible, Mark said, letting him in after Leo babbled a frantic, barely coherent explanation. Basement. Now. Door S open. ILL grab water. Leo practically fell down the stairs. the weight of unseen eyes lifting slightly as he entered the cool, silent concrete box. He slammed the vault door shut behind him. The heavy thunk of the locking bolts, a profoundly comforting sound. He sank onto the cold floor, breathing heavily. Safe. Finally safe. The landline phone sat innocently on a small shelf. He picked up the receiver just to hear the dial tone. A sound as ancient and reassuring as stone the dial tone stuttered, then died. Silence filled the tiny room, thick and heavy. Leo frowned, jiggled the cradle. Nothing. Then a low, guttural static began to hiss from the earpiece. It wasn't random noise. It had a rhythm, a cadence, like breathing. Ragged, wet breathing. And underneath it, a faint, digital warble. A sound Leo recognized from deep packet analysis. The signature chirp of corrupted data trying to reassemble itself. He dropped the receiver like it was scalding. It clattered against the concrete floor. The breathing static now amplified, echoing in the confined space. The single battery-powered light in the ceiling began to flicker, not like a dying bulb, but in a deliberate, staccato pattern. On, off, on, off, on, off, long, short, long, short, short. Long Morse code Leo, as blood froze. He knew Morse. He learned it as a kid. The flickering light spelled it out. Slow and deliberate. W-E-A-R-E-H-E-R-E, the static breathing from the phone, intensified, filling the panic room. A sound that seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere. It wasn't just in the earpiece anymore. It resonated in the concrete walls, vibrated in the metal door. The flickering light cast frantic, leaping shadows that seemed to coalesce in the corners, forming shapes that defied focus. Elongated limbs, gaping voids where faces should be. Leo scrambled backwards until his spine hit the cold wall. He fumbled for his phone, the one he brought inside, powered down and wrapped in foil, his last desperate attempt at a Faraday cage. He tore the foil away, hands shaking violently. The screen remained black, dead. He pressed the power button. Nothing. He jammed it repeatedly. A sob catching in his throat then. The screen lit up, not with the familiar logo, but with a blinding, searing white light that filled the tiny room, bleaching the concrete, burning his retinas. He cried out, shielding his eyes. When the light dimmed, the screen displayed not his lock screen, but a live video feed. It was him, crouched against the wall of the panic room, eyes wide with terror, filmed from a low angle near the floor. The image was crystal clear, impossibly sharp. He could see the sweat beading on his forehead, the frantic pulse in his neck. The camera panned slowly upwards, capturing the flickering light, the discarded phone receiver leaking static, the heavy vault door, and then it lingered on the ceiling corner opposite him. The shadows there seemed deeper, denser, roiling like oil in water. The camera zoomed in, digitally enhancing the gloom. For a horrifying second, Leo saw them. Not distinct figures, but impressions of movement, a suggestion of multiple limbs twitching, a glint like fractured glass where an eye might be, a shifting mass that absorbed the flickering light rather than reflecting it. The image on the phone screen flickered. Text scrolled across the bottom, stark white against the video feed of his own terror. WECU. We are here. You built the doors. We found the keys. The phone vibrated violently in his hand, not with a notification, but with a deep, resonant hum that traveled up his arm and settled into his bones. It felt like the frequency was shaking him apart from the inside. The static breathing from the landline phone merged with the vibration, creating a dissonant chorus that scraped against his sanity. The vault door. That was his only way out. He lunged for the heavy wheel lock, fingers slipping on the cold steel. He strained, putting all his weight into turning it. It didn't budge, not an inch. He heaved again, desperation lending him strength. Nothing. It was locked solid from the outside, or held shut by something else. He remembered the car's error message. Cabin intrusion detected. The realization crashed over him like icy water. They weren't just in the systems. They were the systems, the digital pathways, the electrical currents, the very data streams he spent his life protecting and analyzing. They were the veins and nerves of something else, something that had always been there, dormant in the noise, in the empty bandwidth, in the background radiation of the connected world. His expertise, his reliance, his very trust in the invisible architecture of modern life. It had been his vulnerability. He hadn't just opened a door. He paved the highway straight to his own sanctuary. The flickering light above him stopped. The room plunged into utter, suffocating darkness. Only the phone screen remained, a rectangle of hellish illumination showing the video feed. The shadows in the corner had surged forward. They weren't in the corner anymore. They were flowing across the floor towards him, silent and swift, like spilled ink given purpose. The phone's camera, still trained on him, captured his final expression, a mask of pure, primal terror, before the screen filled with static snow. Then silence, absolute and profound. The static breathing ceased. The vibration stopped. The darkness was total upstairs, Mark sighed, placing a glass of water on the counter. Leo, you okay down there? He walked towards the basement door, listening. Nothing. Utter silence. Too silent. He frowned, flicking on the basement light. Leo. He descended the stairs cautiously. The heavy vault door to the panic room stood slightly ajar. Mark's blood ran cold. He never left it open. He pushed it wider. The hinges groaning softly. The panic room was empty. Perfectly empty. No Leo. No bag. Not even the discarded landline receiver. The battery-powered light was dead. The air tasted stale, metallic. Only the faintest smell lingered, ozone. And something else, sharp and acrid, like overheated circuitry. Mark's smartwatch buzzed on his wrist. He looked down. It displayed a notification. Never seen before. No app icon. Just text. Stark white on black. HE is safe. He is seen. Mark stared, confusion warring with a dawning, ice-cold dread. He tapped the notification. His watch screen flickered, then displayed a live feed. It showed his own hand holding the watch, filmed from somewhere above and behind him. The angle was impossible. He whirled around, heart hammering. But the basement stairs behind him were empty, utterly empty. The feed on his watch zoomed in slowly on the back of his own neck. The hairs standing on end. A low hum, barely perceptible at first, began to resonate from the watch itself, vibrating up his arm. The same frequency Leo had felt. The watch screen flickered again, for a single, horrifying frame, superimposed over the image of his own neck. He saw Leo's face. His eyes were wide, unblinking, filled with a terror that wasn't just fear, but a profound, irreversible knowing. And behind Leo, in the pixelated gloom, shapes moved. Then the feed cut to static. The hum intensified, settling deep into Mark's bones. The notification reappeared, pulsing softly. You are seen. In the empty panic room below, the dead light bulb in the ceiling flickered once, weakly, casting a single, fleeting shadow on the concrete wall. It was the shape of a man, screaming soundlessly into an unblinking digital eye. Then the darkness swallowed it whole, leaving only the low, persistent thrum of the house's server stack in the next room. A sound that now seemed less like cooling fans and more like a satisfied, eternal heartbeat. Story 8. The cold seeped into Arthur Finch's bones long before winter arrived. It wasn't the chill of the drafty old Victorian he inherited from his Aunt Agatha. It was a deeper cold, settling in the marrow, whispering of empty spaces and unseen eyes. He moved in after Clara, after the accident. The house, Willow S. End, was supposed to be a fresh start. A quiet place to write his monograph on obscure 18th century philosophers. Solitude was the point. Now, solitude felt like a tightening noose started subtly, as these things often do. A misplaced mug. Arthur was meticulous. His mug always sat precisely on the coaster, beside his typewriter. One morning, he found it perched precariously on the edge of the kitchen sink, cold, as if placed hours ago. He dismissed it. Stress, grief playing tricks. Then came the sounds. Not loud, intrusive noises, but intimate ones, a faint scratch inside the walls, like desperate fingernails on plaster, or the soft, rhythmic drip, drip, drip from the unused bathroom upstairs, vanishing when he went to investigate, leaving only damp stains on the ceiling that seemed to shift patterns. Overnight the paranoia bloomed like mold in the damp corners. He de-wake gasping, certain someone had just whispered his name inches from his ear. The breath cold against his skin. The empty house would answer only with the groan of settling timbers. He stopped inviting his colleague, David, over. David S. cheerful inquiries. How S. the book? Art. You look peaky. Need some sun. Felt like intrusions. Veiled accusations. Arthur began to suspect David knew something. Knew about the mug. The sounds. The way the shadows in the hallway seemed to thicken whenever Arthur passed. Clinging like cobwebs, reality began to fray at the edges. Walking down the long, dimly lit corridor to his study, the walls seemed to breathe. The faded floral wallpaper pulsing with a slow, sick rhythm. The pattern would writhe if he stared too long, forming shapes' eyes. Mouth stretched in silent screams. He'd blink, and it would be still, just old paper, but the impression lingered, a greasy smear on his perception. Time became unreliable. He'd sit at his typewriter, intending to work for an hour, and emerge from a fugue state hours later. His fingers cramped. The page filled not with philosophical treatises, but with frantic, looping scrawls. It watches. It knows. Cold. So cold. Clara. Clara, where are you? He stopped sleeping in the master bedroom. The vast emptiness beside him, where Clara should have been, became a yawning chasm. He dragged a thin mattress into the small study, barricading the door with a heavy oak chair each night. The scratching inside the walls intensified, seeming to circle his makeshift fortress. He bought earplugs, but the sound wasn't just auditory. It vibrated in his teeth, echoed in the hollow of his chest. He started researching the house's history, fueled by a desperate need for explanation, for something external to blame. The dusty records in the town library yielded unsettling fragments. Previous owners spoke of bad feelings, sudden chills, inexplicable dread. One family left abruptly in the 1920s, claiming their youngest daughter wouldn't he stop screaming about the woman in the walls. The woman in the walls. Arthur S. Blood turned to ice. He remembered Aunt Agatha, a stern, secretive woman, dying alone in this house. Had she heard the scratching too? He found her journals, hidden behind a loose brick in the pantry, pages filled not with recipes, but with increasingly frantic entries. October 12th. The cold spot in the blue room is worse, like stepping into a grave. November 3rd. It has mimicking Herbert S. Cough. He has been gone 10 years. Cruel. December 1st. It knows I know. The scratching it S not rats. It S learning, trying to scratch its way out. The final entry, dated the day before she was found dead of an apparent stroke, was a single, trembling sentence. It S not the house. It S what the house ate. Arthur S. World tilted. What had the house eaten? His sanity felt like a thin sheet of ice over a black, sucking void. The line between grief-induced hallucination and something horribly tangible blurred beyond recognition. Was the scratching just his unraveling mind? Or was Aunt Agatha right? The drip, drip, drip became constant. A maddening metronome counting down his sanity. He saw things, brief flashes in the periphery, a pale hand withdrawing into a shadow, the hem of a dark skirt vanishing around a corner, Clara S. face, pale and waterlogged, staring reproachfully from the reflective surface of the hallway mirror, before dissolving the physical decay mirrored the mental. He stopped shaving, stopped eating properly, surviving on crackers and tinned soup. His reflection in the grimy bathroom mirror was a gaunt stranger with sunken, fever-bright eyes. His skin felt papery, stretched too tight over bones that ached with the pervasive cold. He smelled damp earth and something faintly sweet, like spoiled fruit, clinging to him. No matter how he washed the breaking point, came one rain-lashed night. The scratching wasn't tea in the walls anymore. It was under the floorboards of the study, right beneath his thin mattress. Scritch, scratch, scritch. Slow, deliberate, patient. And then a sound that froze his soul. A soft, wet thump, followed by a low, guttural whimper. Not animal, human, or something that had been human terror, raw and primal, overrode his paralysis. He scrambled back, pressing against the barricaded door, eyes fixed on the worn rug covering the floorboards. The scratching stopped. Silence, thick and suffocating, pressed in. Then a single floorboard near the center of the room. creaked. Then another. They began to lift, slowly, agonizingly, pushed up from below by something unseen. Arthur couldn't he scream. His throat was clenched shut. He watched, mesmerized by the horror, unfolding in the weak pool of light from his desk lamp. A hand emerged from the darkness beneath the floor, small, delicate, pale, a woman's hand. The fingers were caked with dirt, and something dark, viscous. It gripped the edge of the floorboard, knuckles white with strain. Another hand joined it. Then a tangle of dark, wet hairy head began to rise. It was Clara, or a grotesque parody of her. Her face was waxy, bloated, the skin gray and peeling in places. Her eyes, wide and unblinking, were the milky white of a fish belly. River weed clung to her hair. Water streamed down her cheeks like tears. But her mouth was stretched in a silent, rictus scream, choked with mud, and Silt Arthur's mind shattered. The dam holding back the truth burst in a torrent of fragmented, horrific clarity. The accident, the river, Clara's car skidding off the rain-slicked bridge. He'd been driving. He'd swerved, not to avoid the deer, as he'd told everyone, including himself. He'd swerved towards the guardrail, a moment of blinding, unacknowledged rage, a fight about the move, about his work, about her wanting a child he felt too old for, crystallized into a single, catastrophic impulse, a split-second choice he'd buried under layers of grief and denial. He'd killed her, and the house willow's end. It hadn't he just witnessed his grief. It had tasted his guilt, his corrosive, hidden sin. It had been feeding on it, drawing the essence of his crime into its very timbers, making it manifest. The scratching wasn't he, something trapped outside, trying to get in. It was the house itself, animated by his poisoned secret, digesting Clara's memory, regurgitating her corrupted form from the psychic grave he'd buried her in within his own mind. Aunt Agatha's words echoed. It's what the house ate. It had eaten his guilt. It had eaten Clara. Now it was bringing her back, not as a ghost, but as a physical embodiment of his hidden act. A monstrous accusation, clawing its way out of the floorboards of his denial. The thing that wore Clara's face hauled its torso out of the hole. Muddy water pooled around it, its milky eyes fixed on Arthur. The silent scream in its mud-filled mouth seemed to vibrate the air, a soundless shriek that scraped against his raw nerves. It began to drag itself towards him, leaving a trail of filthy water and decay. Arthur finally found his voice. It wasn't a scream of terror, but a raw, guttural denial ripped from the depths of his shattered psyche. No, Clara It was an accident. I didn't he mean. The words died as the thing's cold, slimy hand closed around his ankle with surprising strength. The touch burned with an unnatural cold that sank deep into his flesh. He kicked wildly, scrambling backwards, the barricade chair scraping uselessly. He flung open the study door and stumbled into the dark hallway. He didn't look back. He ran, not towards the front door, but up, towards the attic, the only place left. The air grew colder, thicker, smelling of dust, decay, and that clawing sweetness. The scratching followed him, not just from below now, but from inside the walls, flanking the narrow staircase. A frantic, multi-layered cacophony. He burst into the vast, shadow-choked attic. Moonlight filtered through a grimy circular window, illuminating swirling dust motes and shrouded shapes. The scratching intensified, converging, seeming to emanate from every corner. Every stack of old furniture draped in sheets like waiting ghosts. He backed into the center, his breath coming in ragged, panicked gasps that fogged in the frigid air. Then silence, abrupt and absolute. The moonlight caught movement near the far wall. The sheet covering an old, full-length mirror stirred, not from a draft, from beneath. Slowly, deliberately, the sheet slid downwards, pooling on the floor. Arthur stared, transfixed by horror. At the mirror, his own reflection stared back, haggard, terrified, eyes wide with madness. But behind him, in the reflection of the cluttered attic, stood Clara, not the bloated, muddy horror from below. This was the Clara he remembered from before the accident, beautiful, vibrant, wearing the blue dress she loved. She smiled, a warm, loving smile that didn't touch her eyes. Her eyes were deep, dark pools, reflecting nothing but the empty attic and Arthur's own terrified face. She reached out a hand towards his reflection, her fingers brushing the cold glass. Arthur, her voice whispered, not from her lips, but inside his skull, soft and intimate. You left me down there, in the dark, in the cold water. You left me all alone. He whirled around. The attic was empty. Dust motes danced in the moonlight. He looked back at the mirror. Clara was still there, smiling that empty smile. Behind his reflection, in the depths of the mirror, the shadows coalesced, not into Clara, but into something vast, amorphous, and infinitely older. It had the texture of wet, rotten wood, and the shifting darkness of deep water. It pulsed with a slow, cold rhythm that echoed the dripping sound, and within that pulsing darkness, countless faint, desperate scratches flickered like trapped stars. The reflection of his own face began to change. His skin grayed, bloated. River weed sprouted in his hair. His eyes clouded over, milky white. He felt the cold water closing over his head, the crushing weight of the river, the suffocating mud filling his mouth and nose. He tasted silt, heard the gurgle of water in his own lungs. The attic floor felt soft, yielding, like riverbed mud. Beneath his feet Clara's reflection tilted its head, her dark, empty eyes boring into his decaying reflection. "It is so cold down here, Arthur," the voice whispered inside his mind, merging with the rhythmic pulse of the vast darkness behind her. "But you'll keep me warm now. Willow's End is always hungry, and we have all the time in the world." Arthur Finch didn't he scream. He simply stood in the center of the attic, staring into the mirror as his reflection rotted before his eyes. The frantic scratching sounds fading into the relentless, chilling drip, drip, drip of water, falling onto bare floorboards somewhere far below. A sound that would never, ever stop. The house had finished its meal, and Arthur was finally part of the feast. Story 9. The silence of the old farmhouse had teeth, not the aggressive gnash of city noise, but a slow, insistent grinding, like bone on bone deep within the walls. Clara had inherited the place from her estranged Aunt Edith. A woman whispered about in the sparse local community for her reclusiveness and unsettling collection of curiosities. Clara, fleeing a failed relationship and a mounting pile of debt in the city, saw the isolated property as sanctuary, a place to breathe, to write, to forget. She hadn't anticipated the weight of the quiet. The first week was unnerving, but manageable. The sheer scale of the neglected house, all peeling wallpaper, the color of old bruises, and high ceilings that seemed to swallow light, was oppressive. Dust motes danced in the weak shafts of sunlight that pierced the grimy windows, looking like agitated spirits. The air tasted stale, thick with the scent of damp plaster, and something else, faintly metallic, like old pennies left in the rain. At night, the wind whistled through unseen cracks, a mournful, whispering sound that seemed to coil around the house like a serpent. Then came the scratching. It started subtly behind the wainscoting in the master bedroom, a dry, persistent scrape, like a fingernail dragging slowly, deliberately across wood. Clara, lying rigid in the unfamiliar bed, told herself it was mice or squirrels nesting. Perfectly natural. She bought traps, set them meticulously. They remained unsprung, pristine islands of potential violence in the dusty corners. The scratching continued, shifting location each night, sometimes behind the headboard, sometimes under the floorboards near the ancient clawfoot tub, sometimes, chillingly, inside the heavy oak wardrobe dominated the room. It never escalated, never became frantic. It was patient, deliberate. A constant reminder of something unseen sharing the space sleep became fractured. Shadows, deep and velvety in the moonlit rooms, seemed to solidify at the edge of vision. Clara would jerk awake, heart hammering against her ribs, certain she'd seen a shape detach itself from the darkness near the door, only for it to dissolve into familiar furniture when she snapped on the light. Exhaustion painted bruises beneath her eyes. Her writing stalled. The silence, when the scratching paused, felt even worse, a held breath. Awaiting the metallic smell grew stronger, concentrated near the locked door at the end of the upstairs hallway. Aunt Edith's study. The key, a heavy, tarnished iron thing, had been conspicuously absent from the ring Clara inherited. Curiosity, gnawing and insistent, warred with a deep-seated dread. What had Aunt Edith locked away? What secrets did this suffocating house guard? One rain-lashed afternoon, the power flickered and died. The silence rushed in, thicker than ever, broken only by the drumming rain on the roof and the relentless scratching, now emanating distinctly from behind the study door. Clara, her nerves frayed to breaking point, felt a reckless surge of defiance. Sanctuary had become prison. She needed answers. She found the key hidden, not cunningly, but grotesquely, inside a dusty jar filled with what looked like desiccated beetles and small, yellowed teeth, tucked away on a high shelf in the pantry. The feel of the cold iron in her sweaty palm sent a jolt of revulsion through her. It felt heavy, with intense standing before the study door. The scratching stopped abruptly. The silence now was absolute, pregnant with menace. The key turned in the lock with a rusty shriek that echoed through the silent house. Clara pushed the heavy door. Open. The study was small, windowless, and choked with dust. Shelves lined the walls, crammed not with books, but with glass jars, hundreds of them. Each contained murky liquid preserving things, twisted roots that resembled clenched hands, small, unidentifiable organs suspended in amber fluid, feathers from birds Clara didn't he recognize, unnaturally black and oily, and eyes, so many eyes, glassy, staring, some human, some disturbingly not, floating in their viscous prisons, reflecting the weak beam of her flashlight with a dull, accusing gleam. In the center of the room stood a heavy, scarred table. On it lay a single, leather-bound journal, open. The pages were covered in Aunt Edith's cramped, spidery handwriting, interspersed with intricate, geometric diagrams that made Clara's head ache to look at. The diagrams seemed to shift subtly in the flickering light, lines twisting like worms. A wave of nausea hit her. The metallic smell now overpowering, coppery and thick. She stumbled towards the table, her flashlight beam trembling. She forced herself to read a passage near the open page. The boundary is thin here, thinner than anywhere else IV found. They feel it. They hunger for the warmth, the vibration of life. The scratching is their language, their map. They trace the angles, the corners, seeking the weak points. The sacrifices, the small ones, appease for a time. They taste the fear, the life essence. But it is never enough. The geometry demands more. It always demands more sacrifices. The jars, the teeth, the eyes. Clara's gaze snapped back to the shelves. Among the preserved horrors, she saw it now. A small, familiar silver locket, half hidden behind a jar containing something like a shriveled, winged fetus. Her mother's locket, the one Aunt Edith had accidentally lost decades ago. Shortly before Clara's mother died, suddenly, inexplicably, of a wasting sickness, the revelation hit her like a physical blow. A cold certainty flooding her veins. Aunt Edith hadn't he just been reclusive? She'd been a custodian, a warden, feeding this thinness in reality to keep it at bay, sacrificing family, perhaps even strangers, buying her own wretched existence with stolen lives, and suffering a low thrumming vibration began in the floorboards, rising through her feet, resonating in her bones. It wasn't sound, but a physical pressure, a wrongness that vibrated her teeth. The diagrams in the journal seemed to writhe with a life of their own. The eyes in the jars, did they all turn fractionally towards her? Then came the sound from the hallway outside the study. Not scratching this time. Click, 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 like something hard and jointed. Something not meant to walk on wooden floors. Taking slow, deliberate steps towards the open door. The silence had been holding its breath. Now it exhaled, cold and smelling of grave dirt, and ozone Clara spun. Flashlight beam cutting a frantic swat through the dust motes. The hallway was empty, but the clicking stopped right outside the doorway. She felt it, a presence, vast and cold and utterly alien, pressing against the threshold, not entering, waiting, observing. Its attention was a physical weight, a suffocating blanket of pure, predatory interest. It didn't need to breach the room. It knew she was here. It knew she knew. The revelation wasn't just about Aunt Edith's monstrous bargains. It was about the house itself. It was about her flight, her desperation, her seeking sanctuary. It had led her directly into the maw of the thing. Aunt Edith had spent a lifetime trying to appease. She wasn't an inheritor. She was the next payment. The fear radiating from her wasn't just terror. It was sustenance. Her understanding, her despair, her very awareness of the horror. That was the taste the journal mentioned. That was what it craved most. The silence returned, deeper and heavier than before, filled with the unblinking gaze of countless preserved eyes, and the palpable, patient hunger just beyond the door. The clicking didn't resume. The scratching didn't start. The house held its breath again. But Clara knew the boundary wasn't just thin here. It was stretched taut, and something had already pressed through. It wasn't outside the door anymore. It was inside the silence, inside the dust motes, dancing in her failing flashlight beam, inside the cold certainty. Freezing her bones, it was inside her fear, and it was feeding. The geometry demanded more. And Clara, trapped in the suffocating quiet of her inheritance, finally understood she wasn't the warden. She was the sacrifice. The silence had teeth, and they were already sinking in.